Welcome into the Atlanta football party. I'm Jarvis Davis. Coming up on today's show, Raheem Morris wants to be the CEO.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta football party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Into the Atlanta football party, your home for the best Falcons talk. It is local Falcons insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I am your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me are Jarvis Davis, Aaron Freeman, and Tori McElhaney. The Atlanta football party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, the search that began on January 8th brought us to today. Finally, it's like we've been all waiting with bated breath, the press conference to formally introduce Raheem Morris as the 19th head coach in Falcons franchise history. We'll talk about coach's thoughts on February 5th, his coordinators and QB1 in the deep dive, and we'll also wrap with a little Senior Bowl reaction on if there's anyone who might end up in the red and black next season. But first, let's talk reaction to not just Coach Raheem Morris, but we had an opportunity to hear from GM Terry Fontenot as well. And Jarvis, for you, it was Morris wants to be the CEO.
Yeah, when you think about somebody who has essentially failed before, those are the type of people that I typically root for because it's a learning experience. And he talked about how Tampa Bay was a learning experience from him. And even Greg Beatles, said that as well. He was like, he learned from it. He wasn't bitter from it. And to be honest with you, you're very familiar with the ownership in Tampa, being down there covering that team. You understand how he probably had a good right to be bitter, leaving that thing, because the Glazer family he wasn't set up to succeed. And for him to squeeze a 10-game winning season out of those 3 years he was down there, you got to look at that and say, hey, man, the man knows how to get the job done. So, but for him to just be that guy, not have an ego, because, a lot of times guys with these OCs, the head coaches, they want to call plays and they want to be able to run things too. And it's just so hard to do that. And when you heard him say, hey, I want to be able to oversee everything and not necessarily focusing on one particular facet of this team. He wants to be able to focus in on all of them. That just tells me that this dude understands the second time around. And I think he's setting himself up for success going forward.
And Tori, I think in part that's what made him even a more attractive candidate, even this fourth time around for Rich McKay, and of course the second time around for Arthur Blank, because the maturation was clear. Yeah. It was interesting to me, Tori, to even see the same man that we all saw at that podium as the interim head coach of this team, and now to see him officially at the helm. There was a difference there, and you love to see it because you can only hope that an individual would grow from his experience. And even you said, Coach Raheem Morris, his words today at that introductory press conference, it was the presser and the energy that you didn't know you needed.
Yeah, I think you make such a good point about the maturation of somebody. And that was evident 100%. But I still think the core of who Raheem is has not changed in the years that we've all known him. And even him coming back now, that infectious energy that Terry Fontenot talked about, that Greg Beatles talked about, that I'm sure Arthur Blank will talk about eventually. That's something that I think, felt in the room as well. And to me, it was also I take this very seriously, the fact that Raheem came in there and he had this energy, and he's saying to all of us as the media, we're about to have some fun. Hey, Tenitra, hey, Allison, Charles, it's good to see you, man. Been a long time. The fact that he has this rapport, I think, with us already is also a really good. I enjoy seeing that. And I think players, because of what we've seen over years and years and years of Raheem being a head coach in this league, it's an infectious energy and a personality and a charisma that players also gravitate towards. And I feel like Raheem Morris has fans from everywhere he's gone, in terms of the players who have played for him. And that's not lost on me, as the Falcons are trying to kind of put a spark into what they have already. They're not trying to change the wheel here. They're not going into 2024, I think, completely rebuilding everything. They need a quarterback.
Yep.
And they needed Raheem Morris or someone, when they're going through the coaching search, they needed someone to come in here and be able to lead the team to what they want out of it. And I think that somebody is Raheem Morris. That's who they landed on.
And Tori, to kind of just add to what you were just saying, I think it's so important that a lot of people think that, Raheem Morris's, charisma and all that stuff is kind of just like, on a surface type of piece. But when you get, the thing people don't need to understand is that when you get players talking about you in that light, it's not because, he's a good conversationalist or he understands and knows all his family. It's because he talks ball. Like he understands ball, and he's going to help you be better, and he's going to give you things to give you necessary tools so you can make more money, so you can stick around on the team, or so you can get that second contract. And he knows that, and he lets players know that they are invested. He's invested in them. So that's why you hear so many people talk about how good he is and how great of a hire this was, and just to hear him today, just kind of bring it full circle. It was a beautiful thing to watch. Like I found myself just listening.
Yeah.
Because the genuineness is there. It shines through.
You can't miss that.
Absolutely. And I think that's a great call too, because people have a tendency to think that just because you have style, you don't have substance. But I think there have been enough coaches, executives, enough former players who've come out to say, no, this guy actually has it. And like you said, Tori, we had an opportunity all across this Atlanta Football Party crew to hear from him, see him in person, sometimes coaching, so on and so forth. And there's no difference at the core. The same person. You're just seeing someone who's actually evolved. So maybe the maturation, evolution, people need to understand we can speak on it because at the core, it's the same. And if this wasn't who you were, somebody would have figured it out by now and said, hey, this is all style and no substance. But just before we go into your take, Aaron, I just wanted to also clarify, because we talked about the fact that we were going to give a reaction to Coach Raheem Morris, talked about giving a reaction as well to GM Terry Fontenot. And just in case for some of our viewers or our listeners that they weren't aware, obviously Falcons owner, Mr. Arthur Blank, had every intention of being in the building today, but we were informed by Greg Beatles as well as Brett Jukes gave us a little bit of an update as well, that unfortunately he had just a little bit of I think it was like a mild procedure this weekend. He is in fine health. He's recovered. He's good to go. But it was just more of an abundance of caution by his healthcare team to say, hey, maybe this will be a little too soon for that. But certainly he had every other leader of this organization within the building in there for support. But just wanted you guys to know, in case you don't hear us, share with you our reaction to Mr. Arthur Blank is because he didn't have an opportunity to be there. That said, one of the things that, of course, was going to be, I think Raheem even called it the elephant in the back of the room, which is about the quarterback, right? And you said, hey, if there's a plan, we don't actually know it yet, but that's okay.
Yeah, I think the two big questions that we've had over the last month going into this offseason was who's going to be the next head coach and who's going to be the next quarterback, right? We have our answer for who the next head coach is, and we got to see him sort of speak today. And now the next question that we're going to be sitting here debating and arguing and discussing and all that stuff for the next several weeks and months is going to be who's going to be the next quarterback. And when he was asked about that, he basically said, we haven't really talked a whole lot about it. And even, whether that's a true statement or not, like, it makes sense to me that, like, at this point in time, like, they haven't really had firm plans. Cause like, if you're Raheem Morris, like you can't go into those interviews being like, this is what we're going to do in free agency, because you don't really know who's going to be a free agent. Like, you don't know, like, everybody's like, oh, we'll just sign Kirk Cousins, but there's like 15 teams right now that are like, we'll just sign Kirk Cousins, and you never know if he's going to be available, right? You can't sit there and be like, oh, we're going to draft this guy, because if you're Raheem Morris, like, you spent the last, most of the last month preparing for a playoff game. You haven't been watching these college prospects or anything like that. And trades and all that stuff, like, it takes two to tango when it comes to those types of things. So you can sit there and say, oh, we want to trade up, or we want to trade for this veteran or whatever, but then the other team is like, well, give us way too much than what you're willing to offer. So I think at this point in time, it makes sense that the Falcons don't necessarily have a firm plan, and even if they do, obviously they're not going to tell us exactly what the plan is.
Right.
I think it that answer will come with time. It's just going to take a little bit more time.
Yeah, and I love it because at the end of the day, I kind of want them to play it close to their vest. I don't want to give anyone else. I don't want the Falcons to give any other organization any tips, although the four of us here will try to dissect and see if we picked up anything in what they said today. But one of the things I liked, my takeaway was I love the fact that a question was asked by one of the reporters of what did Coach Raheem Morris like and what he's seeing on the roster is currently constructed, kind of what he doesn't like. And if you know Ra, he's not going to just be like, well, I don't like XYZ, right? I'm sure some things that he wants to retool. I don't know if he'd say he didn't like anything per se, but he was quick to tell you what he did like. And he said Drake London, and then he got real smiley, and I like that Bijan Robinson. And I thought, this is great because that goes back to the comment he made to start the conversation, essentially, which was he loved the fact that the Falcons gave him the opportunity to coach on both sides of the ball, right? And he could have, your natural thought process would be, hey, he just a month ago was the coordinator for the Rams. His defense won the Rams a championship. He talked offense. Everything he thinks about is well thought out. He's putting pieces of the puzzle together constantly as he's even answering our questions. Like he's one of those who can think quickly on his feet. But I love that because that answer took me back to him saying the Falcons were the ones that gave him this opportunity. And it also speaks to the fact that there's been a grooming of sorts where you kind of never know how things will come full circle or if there will be a second chance. But this seems like one of those second chances that makes more than enough sense. Hey guys, there was a lot to dig into from that press conference today, and we're definitely going to do that for you guys. So we'll be right back. In the deep dive, we're going to talk more in this introductory press conference for Falcons head coach Raheem Morris and give you some thoughts on what we might have gotten from GM Terry Fontenot as well. And everybody, as I mentioned before, we are not only sponsored by FanDuel, but also wanted you guys to know that this episode of the Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by both DoorDash and eBay Motors. So think about DoorDash, right? Right now, it's pretty mild outside here in Atlanta, but our weather is up and down, back and forth, and all the way around, right? So DoorDash is probably the kind of place you want to go, or kind of service rather, that you want to take advantage of if the weather gets to be like it was even last week. Now, it is maybe time also to pull out your Lucky Charm jersey and order your favorite apps and snacks on DoorDash, because guess what? You probably want to figure out what your final snack selection will be for Super Bowl Sunday. That's where DoorDash comes in. You can order so much: pizza, wings, soda, burgers, or even just buns. I don't know. What is that, a meatless hamburger or something? Anyway, on DoorDash, and get it all delivered without missing the game. Or order chips, dips, nachos, or everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. So get 50% off up to $10 when you spend $15 or more on your first order. That's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCKED23. Don't forget to use it. I'll give that code to you guys. Again, it's LOCKED23 for 50% off up to $10 value on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more. It's subject to change and terms do apply. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is also brought to you guys by eBay Motors. eBay Motors is all about passion, drive, and patience. And you guys, we've been talking to you about passion. We've been talking to you about drive, and we've been talking to you about patience in the form of Falcons' newly minted head coach Raheem Morris. Well, that's what brings home the winning trophy, as he knows as a Super Bowl champion defensive coordinator, and eBay knows a little bit about championships as well. They have everything you need to maintain your vehicle in championship form and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part's guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. And that's in or out, because I really do like the cool seat covers that I got from eBay as well. So remember, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, guys, time to get into it a little bit more for our press conference with Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot earlier today. Now, one of the things that we found out was from coach confirmed that both offensive coordinator Zach Robinson and defensive coordinator Jimmy Lake will be calling plays. So when you heard that, Tori, what was your response there? Do you see it more beneficial that coach empowers them to lead while freeing himself up maybe to see the whole picture like Jarvis a little bit earlier, or are you more concerned because they'll both be first-time players?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to be had for both. I mean, when you look at someone like Zach Robinson, Jimmy Lake's called plays before. I'm not necessarily worried about that. Zach Robinson, not necessarily, but Raheem Morris did say that he did see him call plays. I believe it said in the preseason. So there is that at least baseline there. But
True.
What I will say with that is, like, you don't know if someone's going to be the next prolific play caller unless they start calling plays. So everybody's got to have a chance at some point. And I do think that I like the idea of Raheem giving the defensive play calling to Jimmy Lake. And I'll say this because from the jump, from the get-go, from the time that the Falcons parted ways with Arthur Smith to the time that they brought Raheem Morris in here, I was like, they need a game manager. They need someone who is a team manager, someone who, I think I even said, like, I use the term like leader of men, which I realize is super lame and I don't like using it. Just strike it from the record. But in a game situation, I want to see a head coach be somebody who can go over and talk to the wide receivers in the same way he can go over and talk to the defensive linemen. And that is something that Raheem Morris can and has done. So I think that's something that I very, very much think is beneficial to the overall scope of the team when you have a head coach who is, I think, inclusive of the entire team, and he's not just so micromanaging, focusing on one specific asset or aspect of the team itself. He's looking at it from a totality standpoint, from a holistic standpoint, and then you trust your coordinators to get their units ready.
I'll actually add to that just to say, kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier as far as the whole CEO piece, because once you empower people, you know, they're willing to do a lot of things for you than the person that doesn't do that, right? Or doesn't trust them to do that. Because the relationship between Raheem Morris and Jimmy Lake goes all the way back to Tampa Bay back in 2002. And Jimmy Lake, those guys were there together. And, you know, Raheem Morris was just getting his first start in coaching. So when you think about that aspect of it, that just goes to show you just the type of relationship that he has with people, just the type of trust that he has with people to empower them. Now, granted, there is some trepidation about having two guys that are first-time play callers on this level, right? I think Raheem Morris even said that Zach Robinson had done it in the preseason game, so there is some experience there. But you know, Jimmy Lake had done it on the college level, not necessarily on the NFL level. So there is some experience there. But like you said, you don't, like Tori mentioned, you just don't know until you get the opportunity. And I think that I trust Raheem Morris's judgment when it comes to those type of things because of the relationship that he has with people, the type of, you know, introspect that he has into who he's hiring and who he's bringing onto his staff.
Mm-hmm. And no offense, of course, you know, we will always want to be careful not to seem like we are demeaning too much the staff, the previous staff, or honestly the staff before even that one, because real talk, we had to talk about that because that's kind of been an elephant in the room with a lot of fans leery about that whole connectivity point for the regime before the regime, right? But, you know, Free, one of the things I like about it as well is there is a success story that can be told, and that's a success story in Ryan Nielsen. He's one of those guys that we were all hoping maybe somehow you could kind of keep him in Atlanta because there he was as a first-time full-time play caller and did quite well in that role.
Yeah, I think any sort of trepidation, at least specifically for Falcon fans, when it comes to a first-time play caller, should be kind of gone at this point. Like it's not to sit here and say that, you know, Zach Robinson or Jimmy Lake are a sure thing, but I remember the trepidation that people had a year ago when Ryan Nielsen got the job, and they're like, well, he's never called plays before in the NFL on defense. How do we know if he's good? And then we just watched him be very good at his job, and it's like, that shouldn't be that pressing a concern. Like it's certainly an unknown, obviously, as we've discussed, but like at this point in time, like you shouldn't be like, oh no, this unknown thing that we don't know what's going to happen, like that shouldn't be at the front of, I think, Falcon fans' mind because of the whole Ryan Nielsen experience.
And not that they look down a staffing tree as deeply as we do, but we've looked down this entire staffing tree, and how many times have we been like, yeah, they're gonna, keep Jerry Gray. Like, I think that might have been the one that we were all the most excited about it. We're just being real about it. But even if we go deeper down the tree on the offensive side of the ball, and you look at TJ Yates coming back as one of the QB coaches, that's, still a positive. The reason I kind of throw those guys out there is because you do have, maybe not from a play caller perspective, but I'm talking about going deeper onto the coaching tree and seeing coaches that have so much experience in other spaces and places, and also have a lot of experience here with these players. I think all of those things speak volumes to the fact that those quote unquote new play callers are in good hands. The other thing I wanted to ask you guys about just before we wrap up is the question that was kind of like this other elephant in the room. Of course, it wasn't lost on anybody here in Falcons land that it is February 5th, the 7th year anniversary of that day. 28-3. So Raheem Morris was very honest, as he always is, about the fact that was the worst loss of his career, and rightfully so. But what you got to like about it, guys, is the fact that he also is going to use it as a motivating factor to get back there and say, yeah, this is something that he wants this day to. It was almost like symmetry. He's here. He was somebody who was there as a part of the worst loss in franchise history and wants to be here and is here to start an era that hopefully will produce the best win in franchise history.
He even said he was like kind of a redemption arc. I think he used the word redemption, and he even said like, we want to rewrite the narrative. Like he used all those, I think, like serious buzzwords that we hear, but I think he means it. Like, I think that like he truly innately feels what the fan base felt. That's something that I think I don't want people to get lost on. Outside of Arthur Blank, Grady Jarrett, Jake Matthews, that's really the only people in the building at this point who felt what it felt like to lose that game, to have that chip on their shoulder, to move forward with that always in the back of your head as a part of your history. Yeah. And the fact that Raheem Morris can relate to the fan base in that way, I think shows a hunger in him that the fans can relate to.
Yeah.
And I don't miss that. Like that doesn't like pass in front of me and I don't think anything about it. I think that matters because I think it matters with the way that Raheem cares about the organization because he was right there. Mm-hmm. They were right there. They wanted it. They had it. And then they didn't. And to feel that, like, trauma, call it trauma bonded. Like we're all trauma bonded, Raheem's trauma bonded with this fan base. So, I mean, I joke, but like, that's kind of true. And so I think like we can't overlook that part of it. The fact that Raheem Morris, as much as anybody, knows what that letdown feels like. And he wants to make sure that the fan base has something more than that.
And I think he appreciates the fact that this is also a melting pot of a fan base. Atlanta is one of the most diverse cities. And he said, everybody talks about these other larger cities in this country, but Atlanta's unique, not just to the Southeast anymore. We're now unique to the world because we've got a World Cup coming here in big form. And that shows you so much of what the city is about. And I think he really wants to be a part of the process and understands as that first African-American head coach without the interim tag for this particular team. Still, it's an NFL team, so therefore it's still going to be your flagship team in the city, no matter what you say or think. Ultimately speaking, none of those pieces were lost on him. Jarvis, I think you wanted to chime in before we wrap up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, when you have somebody who identifies with your pain, because
especially this pain.
Growing up in this city, there's been a lot of pain. It's from a professional sports scene. I've experienced, I lived it. I was, I looked at the faces of the people that walked out of my house after that game, and they was like, "Hey, man, we can't get out the neighborhood because a fight broke out and this street is blocked off." So it's real. For him to speak to that and say that, hey, you talk about redemption and talking about finishing the job and being able to win football games and win in the South and get back to that, that opportunity so you can redeem yourself. It's just, it lets you know that he understands. He has a good feel for this city. And for him to have that type of feel off of it, it lets you know that he's going to have a really good feel on it when things really start flying.
Yeah, and not to be cliche, as Tori mentioned, because I hate to be cliche too, but ultimately speaking, I think we can all say this is more than just a job to Raheem Morris. When we come back, we are going to talk a little bit about who got next. There was a Senior Bowl down in Mobile this weekend. The Falcons have had so much success in plucking talent from that Senior Bowl. Did anybody rise up? This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Super Bowl if you are a 49ers fan or if you're a Chiefs Kingdom. We're here to help you celebrate with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Now, if you're like me, Super Bowl Sunday is all about scoring the best seat on. Well, it says, for some people, it's the best seat on the couch. For us, we kind of watch it differently. So we might be very much intently watching it a different way. But regardless of whether we're on the couch or we are in the reporter's booth, ultimately, it's about grabbing our favorite football snack too. And for you, it may be about placing some super bets. So FanDuel has so many ways for you to end the season with a W or 2 or 3. Not only can you bet on who will win Super Bowl 58, but FanDuel also has bets for which players will score a touchdown. Could be Christian McCaffrey, could be Travis Kelce, or it could be some X factor of a player for either one of those teams. Also, how many points will be scored? This could be high scoring, or this could be one of those defensive battles. Who knows? But you can bet it all right there at FanDuel. New customers, join today and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. So just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. All right, so guys, Senior Bowl came and Senior Bowl went. It's sort of like that first pass, if you will, into getting us ready for the combine and on some level free agency, but mostly the combine and the draft and pro days and the like. Now, of course, we know that there were some dogs that stood out, if you will. Not a lot of QBs stood out, oddly enough, in the game itself. So we probably need to go back even a step to Senior Bowl week, if you will. But can you guys think of any players that kind of stood out where you said, might be able to have an impact here in Atlanta next year?
Go ahead.
I'll let
Oh,
Jarvis
good. I love it. We got more than
Jarvis
one.
has some thoughts on some French players. You know how Jarvis is.
Yeah.
I kept my eye on the quarterbacks, and I don't think that anybody really moved the needle during the week of practice, and then that kind of continued in the game. It's just kind of like, I think they all kind of held serve, as they say, just like whatever you thought of them going into the week, you probably thought the same thing coming out of the week. And so we'll see how the rest of this pre-draft process goes for some of these Senior Bowl quarterbacks, as well as some of the guys that weren't there.
So nobody changed your mind about being QB1 for Flowery? Okay, just checking. Jarvis.
I would have to go with a couple of guys that play on the defensive line. Docking, right? So I would have to go with the edge player out of Penn State, Adisa Isaac. He's a guy that I really thought that, really established himself, especially in teams. And, a lot of times everybody pays attention to the one-on-one drills and pass rush. I get it. I understand it. But there's something that speaks to me when you see a guy in 11-on-11 out there shining, and out there making plays and being able to communicate with his teammates and everything like that. So I think he's a guy that I feel like he made some money down there. And also Braden Fitz, the D tackle out of Florida State. I thought he was a guy that, yes, I know, Davion Yamada and Grady Jarrett getting a little up there in age. They still got juice left in the tank. I'm not gonna go there. But there is some room for some young talent to come in and kind of learn under those guys and be able to take a chance and be able to, have those guys be ready to step in once those guys do finally say, hey, it's time for me to hang it up. So, yeah, those are two guys that just popped for me while I was down in Mobile.
Gotcha. And I would say, and I know this is probably going to sound so cliche-ish, but it's almost like every year you kind of watch to see, will a dog come to the forefront or will a dog not come to the forefront? And I know that like Ladd McConkey definitely had his stock rise, but for me, I am like praying, hoping, and wishing. And you guys know I'm a Steelers fan. I always leave that as full disclosure. But on the same token, we're stacked. We're good. But the Falcons could use a wide receiver. Like we know that Drake London is that dude. but they could use another wide receiver, like maybe wide receiver 2, if you will.
They need a slot.
I love it. Tori.
I mean, if Zach Robinson's coming, they need a slot.
Right.
Yes, they need. Yes, amen.
Yes,
Amen,
exactly. And I think he's one of those guys that you wouldn't have to spend that 8 if the Falcons chose to stay at 8. You would not have to spend that 8 there at all, because I really do want them to either, if there's a QB there and they decide that that's the direction they want to go and that they can use that to, move up just a couple slots, or if there's a pass rusher there, an edge rusher, then I'd want him to go that route. I wouldn't want another position player by any stretch of the imagination, but I think you could probably get Ladd and not have to use that pick to get him.
T, can I add this too? Ladd, I think Ladd would be an excellent addition. So, I got to give the little guys a lot of love, because I always show the big boys a love. Can I throw a name out there? Jarvis Brownlee Jr. Now,
come on.
No bias. There's no bias. There's no bias. I promise. There's no bias. Jarvis Brownlee Jr., cornerback out of Louisville. We've been always we've seen a revolving door that is the corner that plays opposite of AJ Terrell, right? And we've seen teams pick on that side. Whoever's over there, that's where we throw on the rock. 2-4, he pretty much got things pretty much handled on his side of the field. I think if you get a guy like that, because the way he was able to just mirror guys in one-on-ones, you just don't see that too often. I'm like, there was one instance where he was going up against Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint, wide receiver out of Georgia. He literally ran the route for him. When you see guys do stuff like that, that lets you know that they are picking up on tendencies. And this was the second day of practice now. We've only gone through 1.5 days of practice. So when you see guys pick up on tendencies from guys that they've gone against prior to, that lets you know that that dude is a student of the game. And for him to be able to do that in less than 48 hours, that lets me know that, hey, the Falcons probably need to go and put that man in red and black again, because Louisville got the red and black in their uniform. So, yeah, go ahead and continue the tradition, my brother.
Fair enough. Well, listen, we appreciate you guys for stopping by the Atlanta Football Party. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you tomorrow for the Atlanta Football Party, the Dogs edition. See ya.